Don't be shy. Oh, it's 10:01. Hello to those with us online. We're glad you're here. And then everybody got so quiet. Okay. Are we all good to go, you guys? Are we live streaming? All right. Well, welcome to the Church of the Good Shepherd. And I think we do still have some folks streaming in here. It is really good to see you all today. I hope everybody picked up a packet at the entrance, a booklet that is your workbook for today. We will have a time for general questions at the end of the main presentation. We've set aside 2 hours. It certainly won't take 2 hours to do this presentation. But we will also have some open work time at the end when you can consult with one another, with, for instance, spouses who might be here, those who you want to ask opinions of. And at the end, I also will park myself at the piano for those who want to run through hymns and try to imagine what hymns you'd like in your funeral service. You don't have to finish your work today either. The main focus here is funeral planning. But what you can do is take your workbook home and continue to consider. But hopefully we will give you a good start. So, as people get settled, I would like to open with a prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. O God, whose days are without end, and whose mercies cannot be numbered, make us, we pray, deeply aware of the shortness and uncertainty of human life, and let your Holy Spirit lead us in holiness and righteousness all our days, that when we shall have served you in our generation, we may be gathered to our ancestors, having the testimony of a good conscience, in the communion of the Catholic Church, in the confidence of a certain faith, in the comfort of a religious and holy hope, in favor with you, our God, and in perfect charity with the world. All this we ask through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. That's from a section of the burial rite called Additional Prayers. That one's from page 504, just part of the wealth of what's in the Book of Common Prayer. Yeah, there we go. Bob's on top of the slides. No, Gay is somebody's on top of the slides. Bob and Gay Neal, thank you for being here today and making it such that we can include folks online who are also seeing this presentation. I want to first introduce myself. I'm Josh Hostler, the rector of Good Shepherd. I know all of you now. I was really glad to meet you two today. Welcome. The mission of the Church of the Good Shepherd is to know Christ and to make Christ's love known to others. It's a very general mission statement that we do in our own characteristic ways. The mission of the church is to restore all people to unity with God and each other in Christ. That comes out of the Catechism in the Book of Common Prayer. But we are here today under the auspices of the Good Shepherd Legacy Society, which has its own purpose statement. The purpose of the Good Shepherd Legacy Society is to gratefully acknowledge those faithful persons who have made provisions to leave a documented gift of a portion of their accumulated assets to the Church of the Good Shepherd at the end of their lives. Legacy members are encouraged to have conversations with family, especially those not directly connected with Good Shepherd, about their gift and their wishes. And that's part of the reason why we're here today. And the next slide, please. Here we go, from Psalm 90, verse 12. Teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. And I think it's only fair that we point out that this wonderful graphic of Jesus with the hourglass is courtesy of AI. Had a lot of fun putting that together. And I think it's a kind of a striking image. You know, here's Jesus saying, you're not going to live forever. And we can approach that with terror, or we can approach that with some measure of lightheartedness. And we can do that with the understanding of the responsibility that we have to prepare, to number our days, We don't know how many we have left, but we can prepare for those we love to go through the time when we are no longer here. Which leads us to the next question. Why would I plan my own funeral service? Can't someone else do that for me? I don't want to think about this stuff. Well, at first it might seem a bit macabre to do this, right? But picture the scene. You have just gone on to glory, and the people you love are grieving. No matter how far in the future this is, no matter how quickly or slowly it happened, no matter how much there might even be a measure of relief at the end of suffering, no matter how prepared everybody tried to be, when somebody dies, it hurts. We don't want, in that moment, to be overwhelmed with decisions we don't know how to make and that we're afraid of making badly. So I'm speaking now to the people who are making the plans, with all due respect to any loved ones who may be present on Zoom or wherever, or watching this on live stream, or watching this later when you share it with them. I can't tell you how many times I've had to sit down to plan a funeral service with grieving people who feel they have nothing to offer. They may have little or no connection to the church. They may have never read any of the Bible. They might not know any of the hymns. They might not even see the value in having a funeral service. They may not recognize the need that all humans have for ritual. They may not understand that this community needs a way to grieve the loss of you. They may not even recognize how much their loved one meant to the people of Good Shepherd. Yet the burial rite of the Episcopal Church has a way of guiding people through this grief. And this too I've seen time and time again. People who have no other connection to the church, or who may have walked away from the church for very good reasons, find themselves blessed by these words, the words in the prayer book, the actions, the music, the environment. I remember in particular a funeral I did at St. Paul's in Bellingham, where there was a man who very clearly was not familiar with church. And he stumbled up to the communion rail and received communion. And afterward he came up to me at the reception and said, "So the part where I came up to get the bread and the wine?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "So that's baptism, huh? I've never done that before." You never know what you're going to get. Your loved ones also may not understand why you give money to the church. It may not even occur to them that a final gift to the church in your name would be something you'd want to do. If you don't specify it in your estate plans, it may not happen, and even if it does, it may be far different a gift from what you would like to give. Again, all due respect to any family members watching this who are not as connected to the church. I'm giving extreme examples to point out the need for communication in advance and in writing. Make some decisions about your funeral service now, and that will be a gift to your loved ones later. So, you have in front of you a booklet, and hopefully you took a pen when you came in. Let's just start going through that booklet together. And you know what? I should probably have a booklet too. I don't. I'll be right back. Oh, thank you, Jim. I need to be able to see what you're seeing, and I didn't prepare to do that. Oh, thanks, Ken. All right, thanks, Jim. So I put this booklet together. This is an expansion of what I have typically given people. I've never done it this way before, sitting together with a large group of people to plan together. Normally, it's me and one other person sitting alone in my office talking through this sheet. So I've expanded on it a little bit. And most of this booklet consists of the available readings for a funeral from the Bible, and also some suggested hymns. So the actual advanced planning is just the first 3 pages, but the 3 to 5 pages. But the hope is that you would turn this in to me if this is the place where you intend to have your funeral, and I will make a file with your name on it, keep it in the file cabinet. And even later on someday when I'm no longer the rector, the next person to come along will still have that file and can pull it out when that inevitable day comes and find it helpful. I want to ask you to go ahead and fill out some of the information on the front while we're talking. Include your full name. Include all of the things that it's asking you for here. These are the sort of the vital stats, right? It's going to be pretty easy to fill out. It includes the question, are you baptized? Are you confirmed or received into the Episcopal Church? Are you a communicant? You know what the definition of being a communicant is? It means that you have received Holy Communion at least 3 times in the last year. That's a pretty light lift, isn't it? For a while, we actually didn't worry about that rule at all because nobody was receiving communion during the total lockdown. But that's a good standard definition, and it's a very easy definition. Things like that might not seem important to you and might seem really unimportant once you've died, but they are actual traditional designations in the official book of burials. They want to know who was baptized, confirmed, communicating. And future generations can look back on this. I invite you, actually, in the open work time to come and see what it is that we put in the funeral book and to just look back on the folks you may know who have had their funeral services here in recent years. Be sure to think towards the future. Name 3 family contacts if you can, people whose information is likely to still be the same at some point in the future so that we know who we can be in touch with, and multiple people just in case people move around or unreachable so that we know we can reach them. I'd like to ask for the next slide, please. I want to talk a little about the structure of the funeral service. There are 3 parts to the Episcopal service of the burial of the dead. There is the main service, beginning on page 491 if you're looking at Rite 2. And that works just like a regular Sunday service, but with some funeral-specific components. On page 499, we get to the part called the commendation, which is a special set of prayers that are done only if the person's remains are present here in the church. Whether that's coffin, urn, whatever. It's the prayers that the priest says over your remains. And then the third part is the committal, which at Good Shepherd needs to happen elsewhere. We don't have a final resting place for people's remains here at the church. Many people have, I think I've probably done more services at Tahoma National Cemetery than anywhere else. But I've certainly done them in other places too. The committal can happen at any time after that, and sometimes it's long after that. It just depends on what the arrangements are. But recognize that the committal is the third and final part of the funeral service. I'll talk more about that later on. And we can have the next slide. So the question today is, what can I decide in advance? What is it possible for me to decide about now, at least provisionally? Looking at page 2 of your booklet, and if you haven't finished part 1, don't worry, you can fill it out whenever you like. Note that it says here that the then current rector of Good Shepherd has the first right of refusal to preside and preach. But you may want other clergy involved as well. And if that's the case, you might list that person here. I know that one request I sometimes get is, could Linda Potter come back and be the deacon at my service? At which I say, absolutely, and I call Linda. Sometimes I offer that anyway, if I know that the person was close with her and she came from this place and now serves at Christ Church Puyallup, but that's perfectly appropriate. It asks here what rite you want, Rite 1, Rite 2, but there's a third checkbox here that, think about this, whatever rite is most familiar to parishioners at that time. You don't know how far in the future your funeral will be. We could have a totally new Book of Common Prayer by that time. There could be new rites written that we haven't yet anticipated, and that might be the most comfortable thing for the people. Notice I don't put here 1928 prayer book. The reason for that is we don't use the 1928 prayer book anymore. I did once get a request specified in the funeral plans, bury me with the 1928 prayer book, and I want the rector to read the gospel from my copy of it that I personally carried all my life. I called up Bishop Greg and I said, Bishop Greg, I know we don't use the 1928 prayer book anymore. May I use it for this occasion because the deceased wanted it? And he said, absolutely. But that was a pastoral exception. I'm not going to go through all of the stuff at once here, but the next thing I want to mention, okay, first of all, I want to point out that in your booklet, there is some grayed out text that I had not intended to appear so lightly on the page. You probably can barely see it at all. It looks like a ghost wrote it. I thought the text would be printed a little less lightly than that, but these are decisions that you may not want to be bothered with. This is how to plan the whole service, which very specific prayers, which form of the prayers of the people, which Eucharistic prayer. You may or may not care. So if you can't see that part, don't worry about it. We're treading lightly over those very, very specific. I mean, some of you look puzzled like you can't even see the text. It's so light. Never mind. We're just looking at the black text here. We will talk about music in a little while. What readings from Scripture do I want read at my funeral service? The Book of Common Prayer prescribes certain ones. There are certain options for readings, and they are all here in your booklet. So the task is to choose which ones you would like. Let's see. Are there certain people who I want to read or lead prayers at my service? Bear in mind that you may survive some of them, right? So all such prep work is provisional. Usually, when I pull out the file that someone left years ago, 15, 20 years ago for their funeral, and they list the people they would like to be involved, it includes people who are no longer with us. And at that point, we have to pivot. That's okay. Let's have the next slide. What music do I want? Let me have you look at page 4 right here. Now, there is much more leeway for music at the service than for readings. There is no specific list of hymns that must or can be used. But what I've given you here is many available options. I went back through all the funeral service leaflets from the last 5 years at Good Shepherd, and the top half of this page is the most popular funeral hymns at Good Shepherd. On the bottom, I put others that have been used recently. They may have only been used by one person, for instance. But clearly the top half here is the ones that, there's hardly ever a funeral here that doesn't include one or more of these most popular hymns at the top. But it's up to you. Even these are merely suggestions. The only thing to bear in mind, the music you choose should be appropriate for Christian worship. Secular pop songs work better at the reception than they do in the service itself. Be sure that musicians who are likely to be available can provide the music that you have chosen. So, for instance, a 50-voice choir or a rock band might not be possible at your funeral service. Just bear that in mind. And then go through and try to choose 3 to 5 hymns. You can choose where to place them in the service if you feel that level of liturgical confidence. Or you can just make a list. And I've left room on page 5 for you just to list hymns if that's what you'd like to do. But you can choose more, but that will leave clergy and loved ones to have the task of narrowing down your list. God bless Grace Ogden. I still miss her dearly. When I sat down with her to prepare her funeral service in advance, she went through and she picked like 25 hymns. And, I think we did narrow it down eventually, but it was very difficult. Okay, and the next slide. There are second-tier music decisions that you can make or not make. For instance, the beginning of the service can be chanted. I personally love to chant the opening sentences. I've got a singer's voice, I can do that. People want that or don't care. It might also just depend on the comfort level of the clergy person at that time. If I'm no longer the rector when your service comes along, who knows, the next person might not be a singer, but you can check your preference. The director of music at the time of your death, like the rector, also has first right of refusal to provide music for the service. But are there other specific musicians you would like to be involved? Again, you may survive some of them. But if, for instance, there's a soloist or an instrumentalist or somebody who you could imagine being involved in some way, just make a note of that somewhere. And the next slide. The offertory. Some people are surprised to hear that we take up an offering at a funeral service. It may seem a little weird. Maybe you just haven't thought about this before. But here's the thing. Whenever there is Holy Communion, there is an offering. So the question is, where do you want that offering to go when people give money at your funeral service? Now, you can designate Good Shepherd as the recipient of those funds or a specific fund at Good Shepherd. But remember that there will likely be people present at your funeral who have no investment in the church, but who may gladly give to some other cause. It may be more hospitable, and honestly, more money may be given if you designate the offering to go outside the church, to some other cause that is dear to you. What's a cause you supported your whole life? We've got, God bless Gil Esparza. We have his funeral coming up. I haven't put out the word about this yet, but his family decided that the offering at his funeral should go to the Southern Poverty Law Center. So that is the plan. And the next one, next slide. Oh yes, while we're on the topic of giving, because we're walking through the service and we've gotten up to the point where we pass the collection plates, it's one thing to ask others to give on your behalf, but what about your own end-of-life gifts? And so this is the point where I want to pivot, and we will come back to the remainder of the service and the decisions that we make there. But there's also the money part to talk about in Money, Death, and Jesus. So, on the next slide, hey, wait, why do we have to talk about money? Many people would rather prep for a colonoscopy than talk publicly about their money. No, Jim disagrees. Many people would rather talk about their sex lives than talk publicly about money. Many people hear voices from the past whispering into their own ears, oh, the church just wants to suck up your money, right? Okay, well, here's the deal. Number one, priests are required to teach about this stuff. It says in the Book of Common Prayer, the minister of the congregation is directed to instruct the people from time to time about the duty of Christian parents to make prudent provision for the well-being of their families, and of all persons to make wills while they are in health, arranging for the disposal of their temporal goods, not neglecting, if they are able, to leave bequests for religious and charitable use. That's on page 445. So it's part of my ordination vows, number one. But also, there are other reasons, and that would be the next slide. God doesn't bless us with money. Money is not one of God's blessings. What God blesses us with are opportunities to love one another in lots of different ways. When we have more money than we need, how will we use it? That's a moral and a spiritual question. Now, money is a human construct, but it's the primary system that we humans have created for dealing with issues of abundance and scarcity. So money is a spiritual issue. Jesus said more about money than about any other topic short of his own vision of the kingdom of God. And this is because money is just an area where we need a lot of help. We need spiritual help not to do it badly. Money can so very quickly become an idol. Here's an example. One of my favorite writers, Robert Farrar Capon, wrote a challenge. He said, okay, sometime when you're at a party in mixed company, pull out a $20 bill and a lighter, set the $20 bill on fire, and see how people react. Right? But wait, isn't that just paper? Furthermore, isn't it only 20 bucks? But they're going to act like you just shot a dog or something, right? The ways that we relate to money can bind us or free us, enable our fear or inspire our generosity. And for Jesus, as in the case, for instance, with Zacchaeus, the wee little man, salvation can be equated to freedom from the tug of worldly possessions. When Zacchaeus says, I'm going to give money back to all the people I've defrauded all these years and pay them back 4 times as much, Jesus says, today salvation has come to this house, right? So, one more thing from Jesus then as we go on to the next slide. This is from Luke. This is the parable of the rich fool. I'm not calling you fools. I'm not calling you rich. I'm just giving you what Jesus said. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." So, giving to the church is part of the life of a Christian. It's also part of the death of a Christian. How is giving to the church different from giving to other good causes? Well, for one thing, giving is worship. We trust that God acts and responds in our human lives using the stuff of human lives like money. Giving is faith. We want to trust the organizations to which we give our money, but a gift is just that. It's a gift, not a contract. Once we give it, we let it go. And furthermore, with the church, many benefits are invisible. The church is not simply a business. We may be a nonprofit, and I may technically be the CEO of a nonprofit, but is that how you think of me? Right? It's not just about low overhead. Churches do not have low overhead. We have buildings, we have personnel. It is not a strictly wise business decision to invest in the church. There's something bigger going on. And if you're on board with that, then the benefits are there. Next slide. How much should I give away? Well, there's always the legacy of the tithe. Let's start, though, with just the question, are you giving enough that it requires courage and requires you to trust? Are you giving away enough that you'll miss it and you have to pray that it will be good for the good of the world? Now, the legacy of the tithe, 10%, goes all the way back to the book of Genesis. So I do talk about the tithe. This is the oldest church tradition for giving. Tithe from your income while you're alive. Or, if you can't imagine that or can't possibly live on that, 90%, build up toward a tithe as your confidence and faith increase. We talk about this in the fall when we do our pledge campaign, but I talk about it anytime. And then when it comes to planning for the end of your life, well, a pledge for now and a pledge for then. Make a pledge today that can be realized when you're gone. And know what your percentage is. Why not just choose 10% and designate that in your estate plans to go to the church in some form or another? You can also make gifts. You can tithe from, for instance, a windfall. I have a story for you. I had a website that I was running while I was in seminary, and it went viral. And it shocked me. You'd ask me about it later. It's about pop music, one of my other hobbies. But suddenly everyone was passing it around Facebook. I was running ads on the website, and suddenly I had $11,000. I had 100 million hits in the month of January of 2012. So I gave 1/10 of that to the Diocese of Olympia to a fund for seminarians because I wanted to see that money put to good use. And then Bishop Gregg said to me later, he said, I want to thank you for the gift. And as your pastor, I want to ask, did you consider giving the gift in a way that you would not be as much in control of it? So Bishop Gregg was very thankful and also kept challenging me to grow in the area. Why a fund for seminarians? Why not something with a little less control? I thought that was really good. So when you do come into money you didn't expect, how about a gift to the church in thanksgiving to God for the ability that you will have to use this for the good of the world? The other thing I want to mention, and I think Bill was going to mention this too, but we'll drive the point home because we've never really had a good system for this. Make sure that your loved ones know that when you die, you want them to complete the annual pledge you have already made to the Church of the Good Shepherd. Most of the time, when somebody dies, the money just stops, and they don't fulfill the pledge that they had intended to commit to for that year. It hurts the Good Shepherd operating budget, sometimes significantly, because we didn't know. We couldn't plan for that. So that's something to communicate well to your loved ones. So even if you die in January, right? Let them know that you want to complete that for the year in one way or another. And then make a gift, maybe a tithe, as your final gift. Specify a percentage in your will, not a dollar amount. Not a dollar amount, because you don't know what a dollar will be worth when you die. It could be very different from what it is now, and you don't know how much money you'll even have left, right? I've heard in tough economic times, people in their 70s say to me things like, well, we can afford to live to the age of 89, right? Because they've looked at how much they're spending. All right, so that's my bit about money. But now I want to call on Bill. Bill Gillender's our treasurer, to come up here and present the next portion of our presentation on the specifics of giving to the Church of the Good Shepherd. So.
Well, thank you, Josh. As the treasurer, I'm happy that Josh set up all the theology behind giving, and I have the privilege of continuing, as Chris Stone would say, the Sermon on the Amount. So the slides will be up there, and I can expand on any of this during our work session afterwards. In Good Shepherd, there are basically two buckets for the gifts. They go into our operating fund, which is basically the cash reserves that we have that are budgeted each year by the vestry, or they can be given to the endowment fund. The operating funds are used for the day-to-day operation of the church. As Josh said, it's surprising. Well, on your Parishioner Resource page, we always post our annual budget and actually the monthly statements of our operating fund and our balance sheet, so it's accessible to any of you. But we have a budget of a little over, well, unfortunately it keeps growing, a little over $300,000 a year that we need to meet. And that's in addition to capital, and then added to that are capital expenses. So it is not inexpensive to keep this organization going. And the gifts can either be unrestricted into the general operating fund, or they can be given to any of our named ministries. For instance, the Altar Guild and Flowers are a named ministry. Our choral scholars for our music are a named ministry. So if you feel drawn to a specific operational function of the church, you can give a restricted gift. The other way of giving restricted gifts, and this is something that's important to plan in your estate, is whether you want a named specific memorial. We've had memorials, for instance, dedicated to improving handicapped access to the church. And we still have some money left in that fund that if we move ahead to get a remodeling of the narthex and the downstairs, we'll have an elevator, for instance, as part of the plan. Some of that money that was dedicated to handicapped access will go towards paying for the elevator. The endowment fund is a fund that was set up as part of the Legacy Society. So those of you who let us know that you intend to give a gift from your estate will automatically become part of the Legacy Society. And you can see on the back wall there's plaques that name the Legacy Society members. And as Josh said, we don't need to know, if you choose to do that and be honored in that way, we don't need to know the amount of your gift or the percentage of your gift. That's not important. We just like to recognize that you have decided to provide money to the church from your estate. And those gifts are added to the principal of the endowment fund, which is currently a little over $500,000. And every year, the endowment trustees decide how to deploy the appreciation from that fund. The formula we use is a very standard not-for-profit formula. We take 5% of the principal, and the endowment trustees decide where that's going to go each year. The last couple of years, they've decided to have that go into the operating expenses because we've had some shortfalls in our budget. Our current, as you can see there, our current endowment trustees, who are parishioners elected from the congregation, and they serve 3-year rotating terms. William Bradshaw is here today. Jason Armour is on Zoom, and I don't know if Shannon Molina is on Zoom today, but they're available to answer questions or take comments at the end of during the question and answer session. So let me drill down a little bit into the specifics of what we can and can't accept. There we go. So the operating fund, as we said, can be general or directed to any of the named ministries. You can, with the approval of the vestry, establish a new named ministry or fund for a specific purpose if you can't find a ministry that already exists. However, this does require prior approval of the vestry. So what we can't do, because it's happened since I've been treasurer, is a parishioner dies and then the executor of the estate says, well, I want X, Y, and Z to go towards this purpose. That we really can't do. Well, it's not a national church. I always say that we have the National Episcopal Church, but we're an international Episcopal church. But from the big church on down, they really strongly discourage vestries from sort of accepting designated gifts without prior approval of the vestry. And generally, if you or your executors want a designated fund, the gift has to be at least $5,000. Endowment gifts are generally unrestricted. They just go into the principal of the endowment fund. But the gift policy does say that you can, with the approval of the trustees, establish restricted subfunds. Right now, the endowment fund doesn't have any restricted subfunds. And since I've been treasurer, there haven't been any requests to establish restricted subfunds. Okay, yes. So this is important. Can you give gifts other than cash or securities? Right now, cash or securities can be given. Art, collectibles, jewelry, et cetera, can be considered, but the church doesn't have any way to actually dispose of that. The way that's happened is people have had their estate, their executor, turn that sort of gift into cash and then given that cash or a percentage of that cash to the church. Securities and life insurance policies are actually easily accepted. The diocese has a good mechanism to dispose of those and turn them into cash. You need to realize that they aren't held in any way. Like if you give 1,000 shares of Apple stock, the diocese would sell that on the market and then give the cash to the church. It wouldn't hold those securities, even though they may have upside potential. The endowment fund can also take a variety of gifts, and they're really disposed of in the same way. However, material goods such as cars, motorcycles, boats, planes, really can't be accepted. We don't have a 1-800 or 1-877 Cars for Kids kind of capability. You have to, your estate would have to dispose of that and then give the cash to the church, or a percentage of the cash. And then a few practical reflections. Since I've been treasurer, these issues have arisen because of the complexity of disposing of gifts other than cash or security. I would strongly encourage you to have either dispose of those material goods before you die and put the cash into some kind of easily transferable instrument, or make sure your will specifies that your executor or family dispose of those, and then they could give the residual cash. Again, there are ways around that in the general operating fund, but it's very cumbersome for both the diocese and for our vestry to accept other than cash or securities. The other two bullets are self-explanatory there. The big one I'd like to emphasize is if you wish to establish a memorial or restricted gift, it's important to communicate with the rector or the senior warden well in advance of need, so that the vestry could consider and approve that, so that there's not a conflict after your departure when the vestry would have to say, no, I'm sorry, we can't accept that, or we can't establish that memorial, or we can't establish that restricted fund.
And Bill, I want to put in, I think that on the screen, the text is probably too small for most folks in the room to read, so not so much self-explanatory. You might just want to share it.
Well, the other one was basically, if you're considering non-cash or non-security donations, please strongly consider disposing of them and turning them into cash ahead of time. And then the final one Josh said, and I think that's the fact that your celestial year may not coincide with our fiscal year, so do make sure that your executors or estate understand that you want to fulfill your pledge for the fiscal year, because that has come up several times, and people have been very gracious about it and eventually fulfilled the pledge when Josh has talked to the executors. But it does cause confusion if it isn't clear that you want to make sure your pledge for a given fiscal year is completed. So that's it, the sermon on the amount.
Okay, thank you, Bill. All right. So that's our significant sidebar as we walk through the funeral service. That was all the offertory, and then we allowed that to take us in this other direction. But I want to move on through the rest of the service, and don't forget we'll have some general questions here at the end. What happens after the offertory? Holy Communion, that's right. Will there be Holy Communion at your funeral service? This is a decision you can make. There is nothing more appropriate for a Christian burial than for us to share the body and blood of Christ together. It is so perfect. But there are people who, as with weddings, sometimes opt out of communion, sometimes because of denominational differences in the family, right? I mean, honestly, that just might be a hard point for some people. That's okay too. though it may not be as necessary as you think. I think good communication among your family about your wishes, and if you wish to have communion at your service, well, you're not here anymore. So they'll have to deal with it, right? It's when the family gets together and they're the ones making the decisions that sometimes it's like, well, this whole branch of the family is Catholic, and I don't think they'd feel comfortable receiving, so no. I just want to encourage communion at your service. Now, the commendation, as I said, is the second of three parts of the funeral service. It follows on the end of Eucharist proper, and it can be found beginning on page 499 if you're looking at Rite 2. These are some of the loveliest prayers in the service, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. But we only get to do them if your remains are present on site. I have sometimes said to a family, well, I know that it's a little easier for the funeral home to just have the coffin taken straight to the graveside, but if they could make a detour to the church first, that would be really nice for the sake of doing the whole funeral service. So I just want to mention that, that you can specify, I want my remains to be present at the service. This is the most appropriate option if possible. With an urn, it's generally much, much easier, although most families don't realize until they need to deal with it that sometimes it takes the crematorium some time. My own dad's funeral service, this was a very close call, getting the ashes in time for the date that we had scheduled already and told everybody was the date. In fact, the Bishop of Arizona was doing my dad's service. He was a priest, and when you're a priest, the bishop might do your service. And Bishop Jennifer, we had to recruit her to stop in Phoenix on the way and pick up the ashes for us. And she was very gracious, and she did that. So that's something to be aware of as well, and for your families to be aware of, to not set the date until you can be absolutely sure that you're going to have the ashes by then. And the next slide, where will my remains be interred? It's amazing how many families just don't know what to do with the remains once they have them. When I was at St. Paul's Bellingham, it was kind of a surprise. There were a number, we did a lot of funerals. It's the fourth largest congregation in the diocese, and there were constant funerals going on. And it was amazing how many urns were stored inside the high altar, because there was no other place for them to go, and the family had kind of been like, I'm not sure what to do with these, and no decisions had been made about them. This is a really good decision for you to make in advance, to get the niche, get the plot, get whatever it is set up while you are still alive so that they don't have to deal with it later. God bless my mother-in-law. We're still not sure what's going to happen with her because she just didn't specify. Do you want your ashes scattered, right? That sort of thing. Better to document a decision than leave your loved ones hanging. And then finally, back up one more, I'm sorry. Thank you. One more note on the committal. The priest is ideally present for the committal, the third part, at the final resting place as well. You may have an image in your mind of the family just going out on a boat and very placidly getting rid of the remains. Invite me, please, because there's more rite. This is part 3 of the service, and it's very brief. It's 5 minutes, but it is the completion of the process. And even if it's a long way away, you don't need to fly me to Hawaii, but even if it's a bit of a drive, I'm happy to be there and to be part of that as well. So at least extend the invitation to whoever the priest is. All right, now I'm ready for that. Just one more thing. Beware of making decisions that are so specific that they might place more difficulty on your family while they are grieving, right? Build flexibility into your wishes. If possible is a good phrase. It can lift a burden from your loved ones. I would like there to be, I would like the reception to be at such and such place if possible, and then that place doesn't exist anymore, or is too expensive, or whatever. I don't know, I'm making something up. But if possible is very helpful. And so I want to take some general questions at this time for Bill or me, after which we'll have a closing prayer, and then we will open it up for work time in general, for you to have some leisurely time just to work through your form, to dream, to imagine. I'll be at the piano at that point, and we can play through some hymns if you want. So, questions? Oh, Gay has a mic, and there's Dilcia. You can hand the mic right to Dilcia. Thank you.
My question is regarding cremation versus the usual that I know about. And how does that, I hear what you're talking, a lot of people seems to get cremated. But I don't know, is it a comfort level? What insight can you give?
Do you mean how do people make that decision?
Yes.
Yeah. Very few people don't cremate anymore. That's the reality that I've observed, right? I don't know how one necessarily makes that decision. There are religious groups that don't cremate. We are not one of them. Some people really wrestle with the challenge of the question, if we believe in the resurrection of the body, why am I allowing my family to turn me into ashes, right? Theologically, what I want to get across is that we don't believe that that's an impediment to God, right? The resurrection of the body does not include such concerns. But there are religious groups that would disagree with me. Like I know that there, like for instance, conservative Jews, and I think probably Orthodox Jews, don't cremate. There are probably Christian groups that don't cremate as well. How do people make the decision? Sometimes they make the decision for environmental reasons. Coffins take up a lot of space and involve putting waste into the ground, like the coffin, the box. So it's definitely a space saver. Some people are even looking now at the practice of human composting, which I know very little about, but others might have heard of that before. I can only speak from my own experience that I've done in my 10 years as a priest, I've done exactly one funeral with a coffin. And I'm about to do a second one, and that'll be for Gil. But it's been all urns otherwise. So I can all I can really say is that's become a very standard practice. I wonder, Dilcia, do you have any more specific, is it a theological question, an environmental question? Is it kind of all of the above?
Kind of all of the above. More theological, I think.
More theological?
How that will go with that resurrection part.
Yeah.
I know the soul is what's going to be, I don't know that.
Yeah.
Resurrected and things are different.
Yeah.
And God can do anything. But just to I don't know, be part of that the right way?
Well, I can't give you a right way, because that's not a decision I would make for others, and I don't think any of us has. I don't think there is one right way. I know it doesn't make it easier. I can say that a service with a coffin, if we had a coffin, I'm not even sure where it would go, because last time we did one, I think it would go right here. Last time we did a funeral service with a coffin, we didn't have this grand piano yet. And what I can tell you is some people want there to be a viewing. That can happen at a funeral home, or it can happen here in the hour before the service. I can tell you that in the Episcopal worship service, we don't do open casket funerals. There's just no such thing. It is specified in the Book of Common Prayer that before the service begins, we close the coffin, and it remains closed from that point on, because we're moving on from there. Right? We are not worshiping a body that is no longer alive, right? We're not getting stuck there. We're moving forward. I don't see any theological impediment to cremation. I really don't. And I think that's about all I can say. Yeah. Gina, I see your hand.
I do see an environmental disadvantage to cremation,
Uh-huh.
which is it is pollution.
Ah, yeah.
And for me, I would prefer to have no chemical embalming or anything, just put the body in a simple unfinished box and put it in the ground and let nature take care of it.
Yeah.
However, that requires a plot of land, and
Right.
that's more expensive
Yeah.
than cremation. So I don't know what.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you could find good studies on this about the environmental impacts of various forms. Yeah. Okay. All right, Ken.
Just a note, right now the current,
Okay, I'm sorry, Ken, could you hold it a little closer? Thanks.
okay, can,
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
right now there are 2 state authorized types of disposition of remains beyond cremation and burial.
Uh-huh.
One, they're called alkaline hydrolysis, which is chemical, basically burning, produces ashes or a chemical residue, sort of like cremation. The second is popularly called human composting or organic reduction. And I don't know yet, to answer your question, whether that requires a specific plot or not, and how long that has to take place. I'm going to do it for my personal benefit to research that and find out.
Yeah, great.
I
Thank you,
can
Ken.
give you a conclusion there later.
Well, and let me say too, Ken, hold on to the mic for a minute, because Ken Christensen's a new worshiper with us just in the last few weeks, and has very specific experience that I wonder if you might share the ways that you can be a helpful resource for these topics to people.
And probably the reverse is now true, that where this can be a benefit to me. In the last 2 years, I've done primarily estate planning. And it's very interesting for me to come here and listen to the side I haven't had to pay attention to, which is both the religious and extra emotional preparation and dealing with death. So while I can in the future offer some things, and things occur to me now, on the preparation of documents and certain planning, this also has been extremely informative as to what questions I want to tell a client to answer and how to coordinate some specific documents with their minister or their family. One of the big ones that's occurring to me, and I'll end on this, is just that a standard preparation of a standard document for preparation is a designation of it's called funeral agent. And I just see all kinds of ways that you want to ensure that your appointment of an agent to handle your post-death affairs for funerals, this is not an executor for your estate, but at all. You can designate a family member or anybody you want, or a hierarchy of them, to take care of your funeral arrangements and make whatever decisions need to be made, and to follow whatever instructions you have left.
Yeah.
So when that's done, if you are tied, or as here, you have a religious background, I think it's important to think about how that agent that you're appointing can coordinate your wishes with your minister, et cetera.
Yeah.
Because legally, that person has the right to make the decisions if the decision has not been set down already.
Yeah.
So that's one thing to look for.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. So yeah, talk to Ken if you have questions about estate planning. Dilcia.
Yes, one of the things why I brought it up, and I'll try to move on quickly, Waddell has a plot in Illinois, in Chicago. So, his plan is that, he'll be buried there and I will be buried there. So, we'll have to figure out the logistics.
Right.
I came in on the part of music, and maybe this is not the time to say this, but I'm not looking for, yes, I want communion, I want the service, but I want a lot of music.
Yes.
And for me, my time of death is a time of celebration.
Yes.
Is that final moment when I am going to exchange that cross, to meet my Savior, and I want it to be a celebration.
Yes.
And the music that I've chosen is to celebrate and to share how blessed I was, to inspire those that come to my service, to really trust God, seek Him out, just live the life of a Christian is joyful and you know, it's exhilarating
Yes.
for me.
Yes.
So that's what I would like my service to be.
Yeah.
An instrument of sharing, of joy, and inspiration. So I don't know how that could be.
Well, and you know what? You can write that too. I mean, some of the decisions you make about music and so on will certainly support that. I think that the burial service of the Episcopal Church tends to do that anyway. It tends to do that anyway. It helps, it does not deny the grief that people are feeling at the loss of you, but it also sets it within the context of that much larger joy.
Right.
Every funeral service is an Easter service. It's a celebration of resurrection, even when people are grieving. That's why I put the Paschal candle out here. The Paschal candle, symbol of Christ's resurrection, we burn it at every funeral service. We burn it at every baptism service, and also at every service in the season of Easter, because it is a symbol of that new life. So yes, I can't wait to see how the music that you choose, I think I will see how the music you choose supports that, you know. But I don't mean I want to do this soon. I want to look at your list. I want to look at your list, you know. That's all. Thank you, Dilcia. Other questions? Yes, Mark. And Gay has the mic there.
Can you speak a little bit to, for those of us that are from different faith backgrounds?
Originally, yes.
Yes. And whose extended families are in different faith backgrounds. The limitation on flowers.
Oh, okay. You know what? I should have actually printed copies of our standard funeral booklet, although that can certainly change later. The concern with flowers that we typically express is that sometimes people feel the need to overwhelm with flowers. The worship space as it is, everything that's here is here for a reason, right? There are liturgical purposes to everything. If we were to take this space and just completely flood it with flowers, would that overwhelm the liturgical space, right? So what we typically say is flowers there, maybe flowers here like you see. When we have an urn, we typically put it on a stand right here, and maybe there are flowers here. Maybe there's an arrangement in the narthex, but that's about it. And lots of other flowers can show up at the reception, right? I'm not sure if I'm answering the question very well.
I think that is, but do you have any advice for how to share with family that sending flowers isn't, I mean, you can say in lieu of flowers, gifts too, but people in my background still tend to send flowers.
Right.
So do you have any advice for how to explain to people the limitation on flowers in the Episcopal Church?
Right, right. I think I would not, oh, Meg, I see your hand. Meg, could you get the mic to Meg? There are people online, they can't hear you till you're on the mic. Thanks.
I just have to say, my mother, who was a lifelong Episcopalian, always told us, I want all my flowers while I'm living.
That's good. Well, yeah, and I would say, in general, I don't want to discourage people who want to give flowers. I think that it's helpful for them to know that many of them may wind up at the reception and not in the worship space. And that the flowers that are provided for the funeral, if Sunday isn't far away, could remain there and be there for worship on Sunday morning so that the congregation can go on remembering you, right? And sometimes for another week or two, if the flowers are long-lasting. That's right. So yeah, I think I would just say gifts of flowers are certainly accepted, but we don't want to overwhelm the worship space with flowers for the sake of the liturgy. I'm not sure what more I could say than that. Yeah.
I got another question. I think this is primarily for Bill. Just to be clear, if you're a Legacy Society member, that does not automatically mean that your bequest goes to the endowment committee. You can still outline.
Yes, that's my understanding from the bylaws, is that you've just indicated that you are going to make a bequest to the Church of the Good Shepherd. And I should have really said that. You could also split your bequest up. As in our policy, generally amounts over 10,000 sort of automatically go to the endowment fund, but you could clearly say without violating, 10,000 goes to operating for XYZ fiscal year, and then the rest would go to the endowment unless there were specific prior arrangements.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, Ken has another question.
Actually, I have a brief add-on. Make sure when you're doing that kind of specific charitable bequest that you check with the entity you're giving to make sure that you're giving somehow to that tax-exempt number that the federal government supplies. And just make sure that someone calls the entity and says, okay, what's the tax number for this? Because otherwise it can get weird when your estate is being done to say, well, if you get there. I mean, you need to have over a couple million, but, and I don't usually deal with that, but if you get there, you want to make sure that the exemption for your charitable gift is qualified, and that it's so specific that your personal representative that's the executor, has no problem getting it to exactly the right agency.
Yeah.
So in both of those, make sure that you talk with the church about exactly how this is to be worded, and make sure that your attorney understands that.
Good, good. Thank you, Ken. Other questions? Yeah, Bill.
Well, you've mentioned several times the reception, but there weren't any specific instructions about the reception. Is there
That's a good point.
a desire to leave some specific instructions about the reception?
Yeah, thank you. I should have built that in, because sometimes people would really like to specify, I want the Fellowship Committee of Good Shepherd to provide the reception in Seaman Hall, and I would like nothing more. And I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't thought to put that in the advanced plans, so thank you for that. Make a note if you have specific wishes for that. Yeah.
Other things you want to specify.
Oh, other things you want to specify. That's exactly where you can write it. That's right. Okay. Before I forget, I want to mention, I know Jason Armour is with us on Zoom, right, Bob? If you don't mind putting the Zoom folks on the screen for just a second, I want to make sure we say hi, because Jason is a member of the Endowment Committee. Oh, good, we see lots of people here. Hello, Don, Jane, Jill, hello. Wait, oh yeah, that's Jane, okay. And Jason, I just want to point you out, and if you want to unmute and say hi. He said he would be here.
Hello.
Yes. All right. Jason's on the endowment committee, and also we have here William Bradshaw, who is currently the chair of the endowment trustees. And again, as Bill said, they're the ones who decide what happens with the dividends every year from the endowment. So they're good people to ask questions to. Okay. Any other questions in the general question time? I have a quick question for you. I didn't print enough booklets, did I? No. Okay, so as soon as the general question time is over, I'm going to go print some more, so that because I'm really happy with this turnout, well, yeah. I mean, I will go get more. I will go print more. Does anybody else have questions? Christopher does. All right, he needs the microphone.
Rather than a specific other time for a service of remembrance and celebration, has it or is it often done during a normal service?
I have never done a funeral during a normal Sunday service.
So if I ask you to have it during the 8 o'clock service.
We could do that. We could do that. Actually,
Booyah.
honestly, that would be wonderful. I mean, the only consideration there, and I've had this question, well, I don't get this question often enough about weddings, because that's another thing. I'm of the opinion that doing a wedding during the regular Sunday service would be absolutely glorious. I've never thought about it with a funeral, but that could certainly happen. It's certainly a way to implant that remembrance of you right in the midst of the worshiping community that you were a part of.
We'll talk later, but we're looking for an 8 o'clock and hotcakes afterwards.
All right, there you go. There you go. Good, good. Okay. Well, unless there's anything else, Bruce, he'll need the mic there.
This may be like a slightly weird idea, but if one were to record a video message as a last message to your friends on earth for about 10 minutes, that you would play at the funeral. Would that be a possibility?
You know what? I think what I would prefer to do with something like that, because I think it's a lovely idea, I would probably want to make time for that at the reception.
Oh, okay.
I think that would be the ideal place for that. There are a lot of things that people like to do with funerals that probably work better at the reception, and I think that would be one of them. Another would be asking your loved ones to give a eulogy. There's not really a place for that in the funeral service of the Episcopal Church, and there are good reasons for that I want to speak to. It's something that exists a lot in other traditions, but my experience with eulogies is that they are often being given by people who are very likely to break down in tears right at that moment. Only certain people can make it through a eulogy without crying, and there's nothing wrong with crying at a funeral, but it can distract from the actual liturgy. So sometimes when people are adamant that they want someone to give a eulogy, and I do have this often, I ask them to pick one person, just one, someone who is at least going to hold it together and not become a distraction, and who can speak before the service begins. So that way it's outside the liturgy proper, which doesn't have a place for a eulogy. The sermon should be a sermon, right? Sometimes there might be someone who is absolutely qualified to give a good sermon at your funeral, clergy or otherwise, in which case that's a discussion to have with the priest. But as for eulogies themselves and other such things, I think I would say that the funeral reception is a great time for that. I really like doing open mic at funeral receptions and making a time for people to come up and offer their remembrances. That can be very powerful. Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Bruce. I think it's a creative idea. Bill?
Just a technical issue regarding the commitment. If one chooses to be cremated, does the whole substance of the cremation need to be present, or can a little piece of the cremation be present? Because many people, as you know, with cremations, they split up the ashes and send them in various directions.
I've got to say that's a question I've never been asked, but I would not be a strict constructionist about how much of your body is present at the funeral. I would say any amount would be just fine with me. Okay. Oh, yeah. Barb, thank you. Thank you. I was going to get it. Question from Barb. There's the mic.
Okay, I'm just curious about the cost.
About cost.
The cost, like, for the funeral,
Yeah.
reception.
Right.
And for you to be paid. I
Right.
mean, people just don't ask that. And
Right.
I'm curious, what's a ballpark?
I'm realizing now all the things I should have put into this presentation that I didn't. I was so focused on the liturgy, I didn't think of the things outside the liturgy, so thank you. There is no cost to be observed, to have your funeral at Good Shepherd. But the costs that do show up, we don't charge for liturgy, I'll put it that way. We don't charge for liturgy. Nobody has to pay me, but many people decide to give a gift anyway, typically $150, $200, that goes to the rector's discretionary fund. I do not keep those funds personally, even if people want me to. I sign that over to the discretionary fund because I don't charge for the liturgies of the church. The discretionary fund is used for people in need, for new unbudgeted projects that arise, things like that. Nothing that benefits me personally. The musician does need to be paid. So that amount is specified in the funeral booklet that I really should have provided to all of you. But that is available in Parishioner Resources on our website for members, and certainly we can talk later. I think his amount is $250 or something like that. And then there would be an additional charge if there were a soloist or something like that. That person would be paid, like a choral scholar singing as a cantor or something like that. The way that happens is that somebody would need to be designated to just give a check directly to the musician. That doesn't need to come through the church. Reception, that gets worked out with the fellowship committee. So depending on what the plans are, you might have a person designated to be in charge of making sure a reception happens. Lucy is currently the person who is most likely to field those questions and to say, well, okay, probably about 300 for what you're thinking. You know, some of this is questions like, what time of day will the service be? These are things you certainly can't be expected to have to specify in advance. But if you've got a committal slot at Tahoma in the afternoon, maybe you want an 11 a.m. service the very day, followed by a light lunch, followed by whoever wants to go out to Tahoma for the final portion of it, right? So there are lots of different ways to do that. But generally, a reception from the Good Shepherd folks is probably going to run several $100s. Is that right, Lucy?
About $300 to $500.
$300 to $500, depending on how involved it is and how many people you're trying to feed.
And
Yeah.
we only charge
There's the mic.
We only charge the actual cost.
Right.
So it's the best deal in town.
Yes, exactly. We certainly don't make a profit. Yeah. The point of this is to not make a profit, but to just have the bare charges that are necessary to accomplish what's needed. You don't need to pay for the heat in the church. You know, we're heating the church anyway. So we try to keep those costs very low. Yeah. Uh-huh. All right. Yes, Mark.
The disposition of the body is a separate expense that needs to be considered.
Yes, exactly. There are funeral expenses that don't have to do with the church itself that you would work out through the funeral home, and I'm just less familiar with that whole process.
I just have a quick comment.
Yeah.
Last fall, my kids were on my case to decide what I was going to do for my funeral. And of course, the big item was, well, are you going to be buried, or what do you want to do? I've always wanted a burial because I thought I'd be buried with my mom and dad or with my grandparents.
Do you mean burial as opposed to cremation?
Right.
Okay, all right.
And anyway, I ended up with my grandparents as a burial place in Newburgh, Oregon, because My parents were at Lincoln Memorial in Portland. The burial spot at Lincoln Memorial was $12,000. And at this little old cemetery in Newburgh, it was $1,200. So, you know, you can look around, look at the little old cemeteries some of them are beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And some people just honestly don't care what happens to their remains afterward. I certainly know people who would just say, well, you know, I'm gone, what do I care? But I still say, well, at least specify, right? Help take the burden off of your loved ones. Okay, anything else? In that case, and there's always more time for questions, but in that case, I would like to offer a prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. O God of all, we pray to you for those we love but see no longer. Grant them your peace. Let light perpetual shine upon them, and in your loving wisdom and almighty power, work in them the good purpose of your perfect will through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Gay Neal, Chair of the Stewardship Committee, and for the folks on the Stewardship Committee, including Bob and Christopher and Karen, who have all helped make this happen. And Jason is here from Endowment, and William. At this point, we're going to turn loose the folks who are on Zoom. I want to say thank you for being with us and those on the live stream. I want to encourage you, though, to continue communicating with those you love about what this means and your involvement, and just continue the conversation. I'm always happy to be reached later, so thank you very much. And for those in the room, this is open work time. You can work through your booklet, you can ask questions, you can sing hymns, you can do whatever you'd like. All right? Thank you very much.